So about 4 or 5 months ago, I saw an announcement for a brand new album from Warp Records legends, the experimental electronic duo AUTECHRE. AUTECHRE? AUTECHRE. 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 Nah, I'll stick with AUTECHRE. So they were an act I'd heard a lot about, but I never actually got round to listening to any of their music at that point. So I thought, how about I go down their entire discography, and then when the new album comes out, I can make a video discussing my thoughts on all of their projects, all the way from 1993 to 2020. I was like, sure, that'll be a lot of fun. Yeah, it was tons of fun. As you probably know, that new album was released all the way back in September. It is now late January 2021, and I just finished listening to 28 hours of these guys. Yep, I did it all for you guys. You really don't deserve me. But sure, even without this video, it was just about worth it, because they're a fascinating band, and there were some real gems in there. Okay, before we begin, there's just a few things to note. First of all, obviously, this is all my opinion. All enjoyment of art is subjective. I totally respect your opinion, I'm just expressing mine. There are a ton of varying opinions on their various projects, and to be honest, that's kind of what I love about them. We can have a big discussion in the comments. Secondly, seeing as there's so much material I'm discussing, I haven't really been able to thoroughly analyse all of these projects. A lot of them I've only actually listened to once. I've only been able to do a bit of an AUTECHRE recap and go over some of their stuff again. And given the dense and noisy nature of a lot of their music, it is even harder to rack my memory. And they're all first impressions that are very, very likely to change in the future. It's very possible that some of these records I'm currently lukewarm on will end up becoming big personal favourites in the future. It might just take a long time to grow on me. And third and finally, I will only be discussing their main studio albums, none of the EPs in quotation marks, or their 15 quintillion live albums, but I will be discussing the box sets and the multiple part projects. Anyway, let's get into this. I listened to every AUTECHRE album, and here's what I thought. Okay, we're starting off with a 1993 debut on Warp Records that certainly sounds like a 1993 debut on Warp Records. Yeah, this is a style of ambient techno and IDM that we have had from quite a few different artists, but if you're like me, this sound never really gets old, to be honest, and this is some great stuff as usual. Definitely has that spacey vibe along the lines of Aphex Twin's first album, with squelching bass, droning pads, reverb-filled hi-hats, and charmingly retro synth leads. It's just some great stuff in general, and justifies its 79-minute length by being really quite relaxing. Well, mostly relaxing, it has some more intense moments. But Rob and Sean do bring some rather unique flares to this album. There's just some very off-kilter elements that add a lot of flavour to the tracks. Like the track Bike, where there's a brilliant melody, but with the hi-hats and the lead, it's kind of, I don't know if it's just me, but it's difficult to feel where the pulse is in the track. It's really strange, but that's kind of a good thing. It's just really interesting and hard to describe. You just have to hear it for yourself. Bass Cadet has these clattering tuned chimes. Quaristice has an almost jazzy lead that, once it entered my head, it never left. This is one of the highlights of their discography, in my opinion. The calm before the storm, if you will. I mean, on second thought, it's definitely not one of their most interesting albums overall. Not nearly the most memorable thing they've ever made at all. But yeah, I still enjoy it quite a lot. Just think I'll take that last bit back, because there's quite a way to go from here. If Incunabula was their selected ambient works 85 to 92, then Amber is their Selected Ambient Works Volume 2. I see the cover art of this album as a really good representation of the music itself. You're looking at this beautiful, gorgeous pink June, yet it's bathed in this kind of otherworldly dusk light that makes it feel spooky, isolated, and mysterious. The record has moments where it bathes you in this warm, luscious synth work, but even in those moments there's this suppressed feeling of dread and tension, and sometimes that comes right to the forefront and it's downright creepy. Lots and lots of sounds on here that feel like they came from a completely different planet. It seems to very potently convey an almost indescribable emotion, and it's music that's beyond words, really. You should definitely check this one out. It's an excellent ambient album. Wow, this is quite different. The previous two records were not quite ambient, but somewhere in the realms of that kind of backgroundy, atmospheric music. But this is nowhere near it. We're firmly in IDM territory now. Yeah, this is where they really decided to just mash their keyboards to name tracks. Incunabula and Amber had kind of a sound that I could really associate with them. This record doesn't really have that so much. It's like a really nice grab bag of tasty IDM nuggets. Again, another personal favourite. This has been a really good streak of albums, but there is far, far more to come. Oh yeah, and about that album artwork. You know, maybe it doesn't suck so much because I've never seen that shade of green the same way again.
Chiastic.
Oh, f*** it. The evolution continues, and now we're in properly abstract territory. They no longer feel like ambient artists or IDM artists or whatever. They are their own thing, Auteche. And Chiastic Slide is epic. There are barely any albums out there even now that will give you quite the same experience as this one, even from the guys themselves. The percussion on this album feels like a great big industrial machine making noisy, messy, banging and clattering noises over and over again. And as brooding synth pads slowly creep their way into the mix like approaching storm clouds, you're just utterly mesmerized and hooked by its dystopian world building. I've deliberately kept away from Auteche-related content online so as not to go in with any preconceptions to any of these records, but as far as I'm aware, this is, like, not the most well-known or well-respected Auteche album at all. I don't really hear much about it, but to be honest, this is definitely a contender for my favourite album of theirs overall after listening to their entire discography. Fascinating stuff. Check this one out. Okay, we've taken a step back into IDM territory. Weird move, guys. Except it's really freaking good. I mean, it's far, far less unique than something like Chiastic Slide. It's very easy to draw comparison between this music and the dizzyingly fast squirting beats and bass lines of artists like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher. Specifically Aphex Twin in his Drux and Cyro eras. Although it is quite funny how they seem to have made music in literally every style he did. Not criticism. But it speaks to this album's successes that I can say with confidence that on LP5 they make that kind of music just as well as those artists I mentioned did. The tracks are all such fun rides as you're taken full throttle past its various metallic clanks, rattles, distorted crunches, squirts of liquid bass, not quite tuned percussion, and bizarre off-kilter melodies. Yes, melodies, something that we will come to kind of miss later down the line. Or be glad to leave behind, depending on who you ask. Don't think Rob and Sean themselves ever missed melodies. They're by no means repetitive tracks either, there's so much crammed into their runtimes. Different sections, tempo changes, constant evolution to keep you on your toes. Again, despite the fact that it's by no means the most original thing they ever did, it is certainly a good time. This, however... is a very different beast. They've been playing around with tons of different styles for their past 5 albums, but on Confield, they found one that would stick. Super nerdy sound design combined with erratic sequences of occasionally migraine-inducing percussion. Most people either love this stuff or hate it, and it's no wonder it attracted hordes of musical supremacists going, "Ew, it's not bad, it is just experiments in sound that are far out of your league, plebeian." At least that's how I imagine it went. I am kind of talking like a well-educated Autecher historian when actually, like I said, all first impressions. By the way, if you want an accomplished, in-depth analysis of everything they've ever done, including EPs and side projects, go check out the Deep Cuts guide to these guys. I watched it after filming this video and I was just like, oh god, I cannot hold a candle to that guy. And personally, I'm a bit less enthusiastic about Confield than I have been about their records that came before this. But this is kind of the prototype of this sound. Compared to their later similar work, it's quite sparse, quite bare. Actually, some of these tracks are anything but sparse. I just meant sometimes it's not particularly rich or detailed. Sorry, I need to shut up. It grabs my attention initially, but doesn't always hold it. Some of these tracks get a little dull feeling towards the end. But is it impressive? Yeah, totally. You do constantly just go, what are these sounds? Where have they come from? How have you made this stuff? It's hard to believe they're even humans really making this music. Confield does contain one of my absolute favourites from this entire marathon, and that is a little track called Pen Expers, which is actually not a little track in any sense of the word. You're constantly hit with this unhinged, hyperactive barrage of crunchy snares, which initially sidechains completely everything else in the track out of the mix. It's like it's fighting a battle with the rest of the sounds you hear, but a battle where the tables slowly turn over the course of 7 minutes, and the synth line gradually starts to creep its way into the background and actually become audible. Yeah, this is a track that could annoy lots of people because it goes on for a very long time, but I find something so cathartic about these punches of percussion going feels like a kind of outlet of anger in the same way that lots of metal music can be for people. But it's a certain kind that for me can only be achieved with this abstract, broken down kind of music. So Pen Expers is incredible, however, unfortunately I wouldn't quite call the record as a whole anything really special in the context of their overall discography, but it does represent a very pivotal moment in time. Also, some music takes a long time to click with you, especially stuff like this, so I can definitely see this growing on me in the future, where they begin to eschew melody more and more, and go into more and more wild avant-garde territory. Speaking of which... Guys, what's happening to me? What is this witchcraft? These vibrations are dematerializing my earthly existence. I'm becoming a pure pulse of energy, floating the cosmos. I am everything. I am nothing. I am omnipresent. Yeah, draft 7.30 is quite something. If Ben Shapiro thinks that rap isn't music, then what the hell is this? There's sections of this record where you can barely even call them beats and tunes, it's just sound. It's almost in the territory of noise music. Although interestingly, I've heard that they constructed this entire album from the ground up, placing every sound in a specific place, whereas Confield actually used some generative elements to make sound. So maybe that one's closer to noise music than this one is. Take what I say with a pinch of salt. Now, this is the point in their career where some skeptics could say that it is just being experimental for the sake of being experimental and just showing off with no real emotional input. And it was a very challenging listen to the point of me struggling to form an opinion on it or decide whether I liked it or not. But even at moments where I wasn't getting that visceral enjoyment, this entire album is awe-inspiring. I was constantly wondering, how on earth you even begin to put together something like this? Every 30 seconds it raised my eyebrows and just made me go, Whoa! You better put your seatbelt on, mate, because this thing moves so fast and into so many deranged places that there's a real threat of you being thrown off this thing, even if it doesn't derail itself. And you know how I was talking about how Confield was often a bit sparse? Sparse this ain't. It packs so many treats for music nerds into its 62-minute runtime, which is, by the way, pretty brief by their standards. If you're looking for something that might challenge your perception of music itself, then definitely give this one a go. Untilted is quite a difficult Autechre album to describe. It's kind of like the wacky sound design of the previous two records, combined with the fast-paced, frantic beats, lengthy progressive track structures, and quasi-melodies of LP5. What I'm trying to say is, they've kind of taken a bit of a step back after Draft 7.30. Well, not by much, but we've kind of got used to their stuff by this point, and this isn't nearly as attention-grabbing as their previous album. Quite a lot of the rhythms feel more quantized and slightly less abstract. So for me, this isn't a huge standout in their discography, but it can be quite a lot of fun. Not a ton of big favourites to mention. Most of the album stays in the just kind of pretty good zone, apart from one track that really does stand out, the closer Sublimit. 16 minutes of IDM on steroids that's an absolute blast to sit through. Also kicks off with two great tracks, LCC and iPatial Section. So I don't know, maybe a lot of this comes down to my only having listened to this once and then skimmed through it again. That sounds really bad, just, like I said, didn't have time for all of them. I'll probably give this one another go. It just does kind of slip into the background a bit given what it's next to in their discography. Such as Quaristice is the bomb! So at this point they made quite a few albums in a row in a rather similar vein. Towards the end of Untilted, something came into play for me that I like to call Autecritis, where I've been listening to their noisy, formless music for so long that my brain stopped being able to properly analyse it and pay attention to it. I was just kind of registering it as background noise, like when you listen to an album with lots of filler. Which is a bad thing, seeing as that's not like really a criticism of the music, it's just me having spent so long with it. So if Quaristice was yet another Confield or Draft 7.30, I was gonna have a pretty difficult time getting through it. But no, it turned out that their 9th album was an absolute breath of fresh air, and probably the most varied listen in their entire discography. But the abstract side of their music isn't gone on this album, not at all. It's just one part of this 20-track platter, alongside all sorts of Autechre delights, like IDM tracks, tracks that incorporate more actual melodies, even some straight ambient cuts, and actually some of their noisiest, most boundary-pushing music of their entire career. It could have come out as a disjointed mess, but actually the cohesion of this record is amazing. As I said, 20 tracks on Quaristice, so they're more of a pop song kind of length compared to their usual stuff. But its seamless, continuous mix unifies the whole project and turns it into a brilliant experience front to back. Probably its main strength over the other albums is just how attention-grabbing and stimulating it is. I'm all for a good long cut to get yourself lost in, but just the speed of this album's progression is so captivating. Definitely feels like a tour de force of Autechre's abilities, and I would highly recommend this one. Not sure if this is a hot take or not, but I can say with confidence that I think Quaristice is among their best. Hey guys, Future Joey again. So, I've just got to come in and say that I was kind of talking a load of bollocks there, because I was just talking based off the memory of the single listen I'd given the album at the time, and while I do still stand by it being an enjoyable experience, I have no idea what gave me the impression that it was a continuous mix all the way through. There's like 2 or 3 tracks that segue into each other, and apart from that, it's anything but a seamless, continuous mix. Most of them just abruptly cut into each other, which is kind of fun, you know. It's better if you have a shorter attention span, but I don't really think this album is among their very best, even though it's a very refreshing change of pace and a lot of fun to listen to. Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this one. Anyway. Okay guys, I think I'm gonna wrap this video up there. It's definitely already long enough, and the filming of this has been spread out over a very long period of time, so don't want you guys to think I've just given up on this channel. Be good to split it into 2 parts. I'll make sure the second part's out in hopefully less than a week. Gonna get pretty interesting later down the line, to say the least, but we've just discussed 9 albums, and I think none of them have been bad. So I do hope you've enjoyed today's video. Stay tuned for part 2. See you there.